Okay, good morning. I think we're ready to get started. Good morning or good afternoon to everyone, depending on where you are. My name is Tom Spangler, and I'm the Director for Resilience and Livelihoods here at Save the Children. And with my colleagues, I help support the REAL Award. We want to thank you for taking the time today, taking time out from your busy schedules to join this webinar. Before we dive in, I'd like to go over just a few details, a few instructions. We are providing simultaneous interpretation today in French for this event. And in order for this to work best, we'd like to ask each of you to choose your preferred language. You do this by locating the icon at the bottom of your Zoom screen that looks like a globe, and click it and choose either to use English or French. Now, once you are in the French channel, if you choose to use that, you can choose to hear the original language. If it's English at the time when the speaker is presenting, you can choose to select to put that original language at low volume, or you can choose to mute the original audio, and this ought to help you understand the translation a bit more clearly. Also, if you haven't done so, just another reminder, please introduce yourself in the chat. Now you'll see on this first slide also a QR code and a link to the AHA slides that we'll be using today. We encourage everyone on the webinar to use that code or link to open these interactive slides, as they're going to give us very excellent and useful feedback during the webinar. And Lauren will explain a few more details on how these AHA slides work. But lastly, I want to say if you do have any technical problems at any point during the event, just feel free to reach out in the chat, and one of my REAL colleagues, and you'll see the designation, the REAL designation on their name in the chat, reach out to them and they'll give you any support that you need. So I want to, for those who are less familiar, just explain that today's event is organized by the Resilience Evaluation, Analysis and Learning, or REAL Award, which is a consortium-led effort funded by the USAID Center for Resilience. And it was established to respond to growing demand among a wide range of key stakeholders for rigorous but practical support in the areas of evaluation, learning, and technical capacity strengthening related to resilience. REAL is implemented by Save the Children, Food for the Hungry, Mercy Corps, and Tango International. And you can learn more about the REAL Award and what we've done over the last several years at our webpage, which is at fsnnetwork.org/real. So before we get started, it's my pleasure to introduce today's presenters, each of which are representing Food for the Hungry. They include Zipporah Muhoro, who is the Buri Cluster Manager and Education Technical Advisor in Kenya. Alex Mora is the Kenya Program Director for Food for the Hungry. Lauren Woodside is the Risk and Resilience and Humanitarian Response Manager. Claire Boswell is the Senior Technical Advisor for Social and Behavioral Change. And Mary DeCosta is the Global Director of Social and Behavioral Change Programs at Food for the Hungry. So in addition to those presenters, I just want to offer a sincere thanks to Food for the Hungry for all their excellent work and partnership with the REAL Award over the last 5 years. And with that, I'm happy to hand it over to Lauren to kick us off. Over to you, Lauren.
Well, good morning and perhaps good afternoon. We're really glad to be here with you all today, sharing about some research and pilot that we've been doing around early warning systems. I want to just remind everyone that you'll see their QR code. You can go to that link as well, ahaslides.com/EWEA. To join our interactive presentation. So please join so that you can participate during the presentation. To get started this morning, I wanted to share this quote that we found in the midst of our research in the last many years. It says, early warning is important, but it only works if results to action by communities. It must reach the last meter. The last mile is not enough. And there is broad agreement among disaster risk reduction and resilience practitioners that the purpose of early warning systems is to provoke early action to prepare or mitigate impacts of a particular hazard. However, in FH's work across many contexts, and I'm sure you've seen as well, early warning systems do exist, but they don't always lead to the preparation or mitigation early actions that we would hope to see, especially for those most vulnerable to the impacts of those hazards. I think this quote summarizes well the destination that we hope early warning systems will help us get to, but it also kind of indicates that we're not quite there yet. So can you go on to the next slide? So when FH started to work with REAL, we really wanted to understand how early warning systems might be improved to get to this last meter. We started with a literature review exploring the history and current state of early warning systems. Our research included 295 peer-reviewed journals, 62 works of gray literature, and 5 published books in print form. And basically what we found was that historically, early warning systems have had a primarily technocratic approach, starting with a focus on the hazard and the hazard-related data that then is communicated through messages that hopefully lead to preparedness activities and ultimately early action. And we also found that many times early warning systems have actually had a focus on providing early warning information to governments, donors, NGOs, and other official stakeholders, with initially less focus on reaching those most impacted by the hazard. But of course, over time, our understanding of disasters began to expand beyond the factors related to natural phenomenon to include socioeconomic, political, and cultural constructions of risk. And as our understanding of disasters changed, early warning systems also adapted and began to shift and start to become more people-centered. And this has really helped early warning systems greatly, improving both the quality of the information gathered and analyzed, ensuring that there is inclusion of the participation of affected populations at different moments during the system, improving the dissemination of messaging with the intent of reaching not only those official stakeholders, but also the populations that are affected. For our purposes of our research, we summarize this people-centered approach to the early warning system in this framework shown here. And we still see that the initiating point here in this system is the hazard and the hazard-related data, and then moving on to early warning messaging that moves on to preparedness activities and early action activities. And at each phase, the people-centered early warning system engages in each one of these moments in ways that that help improve the system, either through the way the information is collected or the types of information that are collected or how the message is carried out. And this people-centered approach we found has really helped early warning systems become effective in the ways that we see today at producing preparedness actions, both by communities and other actors. And there are many examples of this. For example, the many lives saved in India and Bangladesh in recent years due to early warning systems leading to evacuation plans. So this is well documented. However, these people-centered early warning systems are still not consistently leading to early action by affected populations in all contexts. So why is that? And what can be done to further improve early warning systems? If ultimately early warning systems should lead to action or a behavior, we started to ask ourselves, what could the socio-behavioral approach do for improving early warning systems? And with that, I'm going to pass the presentation on to Claire Boswell, who's going to share a little more about the rest of the research from our literature review.
Thanks, Lauren. So this is the main question that we started asking: what can this socio-behavioral approach contribute? How can we help to improve early warning systems? And as Lauren mentioned, what we found in the literature was that traditionally early warning systems have focused on the hazard alone and on communicating the risk of that hazard to a potentially affected population. In some cases, the warning would not even include a recommended behavior or action by the population. Those of you who are living in the States after the 9/11 attacks may recognize this graphic from the Homeland Security Advisory System, which is a color-coded threat assessment communicated to the general population, but they never told us what we were supposed to do with that information. There was not a call to action. And the problem with this is simply that risk perception, which is the end goal of risk communication, is not enough to prompt action. We need more than just a high risk perception. That leads to the next question. Okay, well, if it's not risk perception, then what is it? So we surveyed all of the literature that Lauren mentioned. And the short answer is that it depends on the context, depends on the behavior, depends on the environment that the behavior takes place, and it depends on the population who will be carrying out the behavior. But we did see some common themes among several studies. In these studies applied a variety of different behavioral theories that we won't get into now, but if you look at the literature review later, you can see more details of some of the theories and the studies that we reviewed. And I'm just going to briefly mention a few of the behavioral determinants or the factors that drive behavior that kind of floated to the surface that seem to be more common. And these are ones like perceived benefits of the action. And this is not necessarily related to the outcome that the early warning system is interested in, but any benefit to the actor himself or herself. Another one is trust. Do I trust the people who are telling me to do this behavior? The literature shows that people are much more likely to trust someone they know personally rather than a distant expert, even if that close contact may not have specialized knowledge. Another common one is self-efficacy. Can I do this behavior? That's closely related to locus of control. Is any of this situation within my control? Frequently, we see fatalism as a major barrier to carrying out action. Perceived barriers to the action or lack of resources. And here we have to consider both physical and social barriers to the action. Action efficacy is also really important, sometimes called response efficacy. This has to do with whether or not I believe this action is going to protect me from the hazard. Will it work if I do what they're asking me to do? If I get the COVID vaccine, will it protect me from COVID? And the last one that we saw frequently is social belonging or a sense of community. And this one is most related to behaviors that require collective action. So again, those are just some of the determinants that we saw most commonly, but they're certainly not exclusive. And as I mentioned before, everything is extremely contextual. So to help us kind of understand this a little more and illustrate it, we're going to do a case study that we developed based on a very interesting journal article that is included in the literature review. So I am going to read this case study, and I will try to do so slowly for the sake of the interpreters. And then we're going to reflect on it, ask a few questions, and think about, again, how a socio-behavioral approach can improve a response from the affected population. Okay, Nur is a young mother of 3 in Banda Aceh, Indonesia. She was just a child when the 2004 tsunami hit, but she remembers it well. She knows that an earthquake can trigger a very dangerous tsunami that could kill many people. She and her husband are aware of the need to evacuate in the case of an earthquake and are prepared to do so. Nur also knows that in the years since that horrible tsunami, the government has built several tsunami vertical evacuation buildings for the population. There's a picture here in the right corner of the slide of one of those buildings you can see. When a strong earthquake strikes her community, Nur's husband is away from home and she has to gather her 3 children and evacuate. She isn't sure whether she should go to the vertical evacuation building or just try to get as far inland as possible. The officials on the radio are telling people to go to the vertical evacuation buildings, but all of Nur's neighbors, including her in-laws, are encouraging her to just get as far away from the shore as she can. Okay, so let's ask ourselves a couple of questions about this scenario. The first is just a very basic question. What do you think Noor did? So if you've already joined AHA Slides, you should be able now to answer this question. If you haven't, you still can join right now. So click on the QR code. And let's see, I can't tell how we're doing on participation. Do we have most people joined? Do we need to wait for a few more people to join the presentation?
People are joining. So we have about
Great.
32 people joining with 14 voted so far. So maybe just give it a couple more.
Excellent. Okay, let's take a look and see what you thought here. Okay, most of you thought that Noor probably evacuated inland. And in the study that was done, this was an actual study that was done in 2012, 8 years after the original tsunami, in which there was an earthquake that triggered an evacuation response. So the researchers were able to study what people did. There was not a tsunami that resulted from the earthquake, but they were still able to assess people's actions. And they found that only a quarter of the population used the evacuation towers, the vertical tsunami evacuation buildings. 75% of people tried to evacuate inland. Everyone evacuated, which is an interesting part of the study, but only a small percentage actually took the advice of the officials. So let's think a little bit more about why that might have happened. So let's go to a little more difficult question. And again, this is just what you think, since this is a hypothetical case study. So all of these determinants influence Noor's action. Which one seems most critical? Is it the belief that an earthquake can cause a tsunami? Is it the belief that a tsunami is dangerous? Is it trust in the officials? Is it awareness or knowledge that the vertical evacuation building is there and how to get to it? Is it belief that the building is a safe place to go? Or is it trust in friends and family? So take a minute to think about those possible determinants, and then you can vote on which one you think was most critical in this situation.
And I can see we have about half of the participants in the AHA Slides. So just again, to make it clear, if you look in the chat window of the Zoom call, that's where you can find the link to the slides, and you can open it up in your browser. You can also follow along on your phone and answer questions.
Right. And we will have more opportunities for you to interact and share your thoughts with us. So please join and let us know what you think. And all your answers are anonymous, so you can not worry about, and there's no right or wrong answer anyway. So, okay, let's take a look and see. All right, so a few people said belief that the tsunami is dangerous, trust in officials came up, awareness of the building, belief that the building is safe, but most of you said that was trust in friends and family. That was one of the most interesting things about this study. So the first two options there, the belief that the earthquake can cause a tsunami and belief that the tsunami is dangerous, are related to risk perception. Those are two components of risk perception. And this was extremely high in this population because everyone had lived through the 2004 tsunami. And there was no variation in risk perception in the different evacuation destinations. So people who went to the tower and people who evacuated inland or horizontally, as they call it, had no difference in risk perception. So we see that it didn't really influence where they went. What we did see most in this study, which was really interesting, was the whole factor of trust or social influence. It was by far the most significant factor when they asked people. And it was, my friends, it was social influence. My friends, my family encouraged me to go inland or encouraged me to use the evacuation building. They did find that the influence of officials had no effect on people's evacuation destination. So those are the two major points that we wanted to bring out in this case study. One, that again, as we said before, risk perception may be important, but it did not determine the appropriate action. It had no influence on whether or not people took the recommended evacuation destination. And secondly, that social influence is extremely important. People are more likely to be influenced by and trust close contacts than a distant official, even if that person is an expert and your close contacts are not. I think that for many of us, this resonates right now as we are living through the COVID pandemic. We're seeing this frequently, that we trust the person we know rather than that epidemiologist at CDC whom I don't know. Okay, so with that, I think I will introduce the new proposed framework that we developed based on reviewing all of this literature. And again, sort of our answer to the question of how a socio-behavioral approach can improve an early warning system. And you'll notice in this slide, you can get more details again in the document itself. But as you look at this framework, you'll see there are some of the same steps that were in the people-centered framework that Lauren showed us. But we've added a few that we feel are really important. And I just want to highlight two of them quickly. The first is step number 1, which is to identify the early actions and their behavioral determinants. We really need to know what are those recommended behaviors and what are the barriers and what could be the enablers to help people take those actions. And then I also want to highlight step number 4. So we recommend going beyond just promoting a behavior, which is important, but depending on the context and the situation, look at ways that we can also support that behavior. And this may relate to some of the determinants that you uncover, but if there are lack of resources or barriers that we could help break down, we should look at support as well. So with that, I think I'm going to hand it, or I don't think I am going to hand it over to Alex Mora, our program director, and he's going to tell us a little bit about the context in which we piloted this step number 1 in Kenya. And it was particularly critical in Kenya because of the issue of identifying what those recommended behaviors should be. So take it away, Alex.
Thank you, Claire. And as you mentioned rightfully, context is important. So I'll share very briefly about where we piloted the tools. We did this in a place called Marsabit, which is in northern Kenya. Marsabit is arguably Kenya's largest county in terms of landmass, but with only a population of about 459,000 people. That means it's very sparsely populated. And because of years of underdevelopment, this means that access to services is low. And the area ranks quite low on very many human development indicators. So climate change has had an impact on the population in Marsabit. And this is shown by shorter cycles between severe droughts from the early 2000s. So this has happened almost every 3 years, the last drought being 2016-17, and only recently the Kenya government has declared the drought a national emergency. So the cycles are shorter, and what that does, it contributes to chronic food insecurity, widespread malnutrition. We see this through high global acute malnutrition rates in some areas, conflict over pasture and water. Just to mention that 80% of the population are pastoralists moving from place to place in search of pasture and water, and deepening an already bad situation. And as I mentioned, water access is also a major issue. So FH works in communities around Marsabit to promote early action behaviors, and we do this by encouraging use of markets when it's possible, and also strengthening the functionality of livestock markets, both at the market level and also working with the county government to influence policy that can help markets work well. So with that, I'll hand over to Mary to talk a bit about the tools. Over.
Thank you, Alex and Claire. So you see, we were beginning to want to understand and see how we could identify additional early actions and determinants of behavior to go a bit beyond just the destocking, which is a very difficult behavior to promote that most NGOs have been focusing on. So we like this quote from Twigg, which is also in the literature review. In order to fully understand vulnerable people's views, and especially the all-important social, economic, and cultural contexts of their perceptions, we need to develop the dialogue much further beyond stakeholder analysis and towards stakeholder participation. Yeah, as Twigg points us in the direction of like more collaborative, respectful, curious and humble approach to learning from the community, maybe a little less extractive to address this very complicated and difficult situation. We wanted to use participatory learning and action tools, which have been around for maybe 30 years, but we haven't seen them used much in the resilience space. If you're aware of some use of it in the resilience space, we'd love to hear from you. But in our digging around, we didn't find much. But in any case, we adapted and piloted a set of participatory learning and action tools in 3 communities in northern Kenya. The toolbook kit will be coming out probably within the next 2 weeks, I believe. Is that correct, Maya?
Yes, that is correct. It's coming
Super.
soon.
Yeah, so you can be waiting for it excitedly. Anyway, the purpose was to see, what behaviors we could identify that are impactful and feasible for affected populations, and to develop a simple methodology that could be adapted to different contexts so that both government agencies and non-governmental organizations could use this approach. Because sometimes we don't actually know all of the behaviors that need to be promoted. Sometimes it's very clear, but in other cases, you don't actually know. There may be some hiding in plain sight, as the positive deviance approach alludes to. So our main questions were to see, can participatory learning and action methodologies identify potential behaviors to promote in an early warning system? And how can the PLA tools be adapted to this purpose? So we tested a number of tools, and you'll see a lot more about them in the toolkit when it comes out. I'm going to just briefly describe 3 of them that we'll be alluding to somewhat in this presentation. Well, you'll get a chance to experience a couple of them. One was a picture. A picture is worth 1,000 words. It's a fun tool, and it uses photos to get at people's wisdom and experience. We had a lot of images from which to select, and the interviewees would select one image that kind of spoke to them about their situation or feelings, and then the interview started. And it's important to have clear, simple images. We also used real stories. Stories can be really powerful and hold many truths. If they're real, relevant, and personal, they can open people up to a well of emotions and memories, and sometimes they surprise themselves with what they come up with. We used fictional stories about pastoralist lives based on real situations. It's really important to get those tools checked out, adapted for each contest, and test them with local community members to make sure that they're relatable for the participants. Another really interesting one was the trust circles, which is a tool that helps to uncover who is trusted in the community and how those organizations or groups build trust within the community. So now I'm going to hand back to Claire, who'll give you a chance to experience the real story example.
Great, thanks. So one of the stories or vignettes that we used in this pilot was the story of a pastoralist named Galgalo. I'm going to read the story just as we did in the pilot, but the questions that I'm going to ask you to help you reflect on it will be different than the ones that we asked during the testing of the tools. The types of questions we would ask community members related to their similar or different experience of the situation, what they thought of the main character's actions, who they thought might criticize him, who they thought might support him, what other actions they might have suggested he take. We had a whole discussion guide to understand better this very real situation that they're living through in their perceptions. But as I said, your questions will be a bit different. The last 4 dry seasons have been especially hard on Galgalo and his family. Galgalo's father told stories of droughts only happening occasionally, but now Galgalo is losing several animals to the drought every year. The last drought was especially severe, and Galgalo's herd has reduced to only 5 cattle. He is forced to trek the herd farther and farther from home in search of available pasture and water. The task of finding pasture is increasingly difficult as rainfall patterns are increasingly unpredictable, and competition over dwindling pasture increases with every dry season. The traditional warning signs that Galgalo's elders have used for decades are no longer effective in predicting when the dry season will start and end. Galgalo's brother heard on the radio that the government is expecting the drought to worsen for several more weeks. Other clans are less interested in cooperating with one another to coordinate grazing patterns. Deciding when and where to trek his herd seems impossible. Galgalo's friend has a cell phone and heard that there is pasture and water about 7 days' trek from him. Okay, so this was the scenario that we presented to community members to get to elicit their thoughts and opinions and experiences. But for you, we have 2 questions to ask only. And so the first is, what actions would you recommend that Galgalo take and others like him? So we just have 4 options there. And the first is to sell his cattle and save the money to try to rebuild his herd after the drought, to sell his herd and migrate to the city in the hopes of finding a job, trek farther for water and pasture and hope the information shared on his friend's cell phone was accurate, or another action. So take just a few seconds to think about those options and let us know what you would recommend Galgalo do. Okay, let's see what you thought. Okay, it looks like most people recommended selling the herd and saving money to try and rebuild. A few said to trek farther for water and pasture. Some of you didn't like the 3 options we gave you, which is why we gave you the 4th, and that's totally fine. And then a handful said sell his herd and migrate to the city. So we do know that these 3 actions are things that people in these contexts are already doing. We have traditionally in FH been encouraging the first through our efforts of destocking and to support markets. But again, as Mary and Alex stated, we wanted to expand a bit and look for other early actions that we could promote and support. So let's go to the next question and get you thinking a little bit more. Put on your program manager hats. Imagine that you are in charge of the program for an NGO working in these communities. And due to the recent failed rains, the NDMA has released early warning information showing a deteriorating situation in Marsabit and that drought is highly likely. What preparedness response programming would you propose? So this is an open-ended question. You should be able to type in your response. Again, this is anonymous, so you can tell us what you think. Okay, so other income generating activities. I know you guys have great ideas. Let's hear them. Some of you may even work in similar contexts. Seeking and documenting wisdom from traditional elders, warning signs of different disasters, behavior of different animals. Alternative money making methods, reasons why they should sell their livestock, sell cattle and start other livelihood opportunities. Early warning information about the drought and other activities. Prepare to distribute food aid. Yes. Short term, yes, that's what many of us are doing. And long term, supporting alternative livelihoods that are less susceptible to the drought. Water capture activities. Engaged community to find solutions to their primary livelihood. This is what we're attempting to do. Targeted destocking, mobile service provision to displaced populations, water harvesting, support for livelihood diversification. A lot of income generation, livelihood activities. Local businesses to sell livestock feed. Depends on the length of the preparedness period. Natural resource management. Yes, those are all excellent points. I can see that many of you are familiar with similar contexts. So this is the sort of conundrum that FH has found itself in. You know, how do we help? And so this is why we wanted to test these tools and learn from the community as to what other early actions we could be supporting, things that people maybe already were doing that we could promote more broadly and support through our programming. So thank you for those thoughts. Those are excellent comments. And let's see, I think our next step here is to go on to another one of the tools. Mary is going to share with us a little bit about the picture is worth 1,000 words, which is another really fascinating tool we used to elicit experiences and opinions from the community. Go ahead, Mary.
Thank you, Claire. Yeah, so we used more than 4 photos, but these are 4 of the photos that we used in Kenya. You'll get a chance to answer some questions that won't be the same questions, again, as we did with the Galgalo example. They won't be the same questions that we ask community members, but just a chance to get into the experience a little bit. So looking at these pictures, first just kind of mentally select one that speaks to you: children, road, bird, or cow. And then as you answer about it, you please annotate which one you chose, like write bird, etc. So think about, hopefully now you've chosen a picture. Think about a disaster from a disaster-prone community where your organization is currently working, and select one image that speaks to you about how you feel the community is doing now when it prepares for disaster. Why did you select this image? So just think about what thoughts or feelings the image brings up for you. And you'll have an open-ended opportunity on AHA slides to share your thoughts. So let's see if I can actually see. So can you go ahead and show some of the initial, well, give them a second longer, Maya.
Yeah, we don't have any, they will come up automatically, but maybe repeat the question one more time.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, sure. So thinking about a disaster-prone community where your organization is currently working, select one image that describes how you feel the community is doing now in its preparation for disaster. And why did you select this image, or just what thoughts or feelings does it bring up for you? Really, you can type anything that comes to you. Be a little bit open there. So the bird means that the natural world is adapting to new conditions. So that's a hopeful one. Community-based approaches, I think this is the bird also. Community-based approaches are, no, children. Community-based approaches are key to sustainably implementing resilient approaches to food security, youth empowering youth, women, support groups, etc. I'm looking at a second monitor so it's big enough that I can actually read. Children, in part because we are working ever more with youth, also the image of them altogether reminds me of CLA. Long road, it's very hopeful, quiet with trees and some greenery. Road, representing improving the infrastructure serving the community. The road, preparation and response to rapidly changing contexts. Not the same that we've experienced before. Children, several are leaning toward children. Joint efforts are initiated and making an impact. Community needs to think deeply about how best to serve and take care of the future generation. Cow, focus on protecting assets. Road. Most of them are just waiting for aid. Some are working. The road provides access to markets and transportation opportunities for livelihoods. Well-prepared road provides a future and constructed to better withstand regular rains and floods. Road connecting communities for solutions. So I probably won't read out all of your answers, even though they're fascinating, but this gives you a feeling for how the tool brings up many different thoughts, right? You kind of get a sense of that. So now I'm going to hand back to Claire as well as the Kenya team, Alex and Zipporah, to talk a little bit about the staff experience in using the tools. So Claire, over to you.
Thank you, Mary. So I know many of you are probably very anxious to find out what we learned, and we are going to share that with you. But first, we wanted to talk with you a little bit about the process and what the experience was like, because as Mary mentioned, these tools are old. They've been around. I distinctly remember learning about them when I was in grad school. We won't even say how many years ago, but a very long time ago. But we had not been using them frequently. We had used them before, but it wasn't something that was common. So not all of our staff had used them before. It was a new experience for some of them. And I think this is an important lesson to share, or it's important to share this experience for other NGOs who might be thinking about using these. Two really nice quotes here about the two tools that we just shared with you. The first says, I really like using the real stories. As I shared the stories, they were very touching. As they heard those stories, it helped them to share their own personal stories. It was quite interesting. And then we really enjoyed using pictures. We never expected that they could make sense of those pictures, but they used them to tell them about their lives and the events. We were very surprised, but it worked well. So I'm going to ask Alex and Zipporah to share a little bit more about that. And I'm going to start with Zipporah, who served as our local facilitator. When we did this training, we had some of us training virtually, but the Kenya group was together, and Zipporah led the team on the ground. So Zipporah, tell us a little bit more about the team's experience, their expectations before we started this process. What was their idea about PLA?
Okay, thank you, Claire. So we had 13 team members, and many of them, about 9 of them actually, are from the communities where we work. So they are from those local communities, born there, bred there, went to school there, but now they work there. And then we had a couple of us who are not from those communities, but we've been working there for a while. So we had a good mix of people. Then we had about half who had who were maybe a bit newly employed, so had not worked in the community or used the tools before. But then we had others who had, used the tools either in holistic community assessment or other surveys or other focus group discussions. So we had a good mix of people with experience in the tools and who. And so even in the expectations, you just noted, so they were expecting the norm. So we come, we learn about these tools, then we go and apply them and come and then give the data to someone and go back. Well, for others, they were excited, we're going to learn about some new tools to use in the community. So it was a mixed group like that. Then they were also expecting, the usual survey tools, very, some technical concepts. There is a systematic way of asking the questions, start with these, go there. So then when we started learning about the tools, it was a total surprise. Some of them, of course, were familiar with the tools. So it was vaguely familiar, yet different, particularly when applied in this context, when we are talking about resilience, we are talking about emergencies or disasters. So it was different in that way. And however, again, the simplistic nature of the tools, they look just too easy. They look like you're going for a chat. And in fact, when we were learning about them, it became fun because we are having a dialogue. So this is exactly the same we are going to apply the tool. So it didn't feel like we are going to do this technical research and get good data, So that was also surprising. Yet again, as we went deeper into the tools, they started realizing that it can work. And their first concern was, then it will take too long, because these are communities that enjoy dialogue, enjoy chatting. So this will take too long. A greeting takes between 10 to 20 minutes. So when we go to have this conversation, how long will it take? So again, so that again took a process to learn that as we go to chat with people, as people who have gone through this training, then there is a way, having this chat, you're eliciting information, but also learning together. So it was, I believe even by the end of that training, even as they went to the field, then they had already gotten comfortable, but also curious themselves, because among them, as they were practicing the tools, they got information, and then they were looking forward to even more information from the community. So it was a really interesting forum, learning the tools. So we learned so much about ourselves, about our perceptions. So we're looking forward to apply the same. Yeah, thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Zipporah.
Yeah.
Some of the things that I heard you say that stood out for me was that the staff thought the tools were too simplistic at first, and that's really interesting. And then that they were so relational, that it was like sitting down for a chat, which is different from the way they had collected data before. And you also mentioned that they said the tools were fun. Unfortunately, I think it's too small for you to be able to see the picture that we have on this slide, but it's Post-its that the staff put up during the training of their perceptions of the tools. And one of them just says, "These PLA tools are fun," which I thought was very interesting, that they actually enjoyed this process, and that it did seem very relational and relaxed to them.
And I also want to add that it was also easy to translate. You know, a lot of the times when we go to the community scope, of course, we translate the tools so that we can be able to get the information. Now, these ones, took no time at all to translate. In fact, it was it even made it even better. We had vibrant conversations during the translations because the tools in their simplistic nature, in their dialogue nature, made it easy to be able to translate, because they are basic conversational concepts that you don't need to look for, what does this, how can we transfer the meaning of this specific word? So again, that even made it more fun for this particular team, because they have experienced translation of other tools before, and it was very difficult. So this also was easy to translate for them.
Thank you. That's an excellent point. I think we often underestimate the challenge of translating some of these tools. So I'm glad to hear that was easy. Thank you very much, Zipporah.
Thank you.
So Alex, I'm going to ask you a couple questions. Alex was with the team during the data collection, and so he was a part of that process and was able to observe the interactions with the community. And so he's going to tell us a little bit more. Just tell us what it was like to actually use these tools with community members.
Yeah, thanks, Claire. And I'll just build on what Zipporah mentioned. I had a chance to visit 2 communities where we applied the tools, one around the Marsabit Mountain area, which is a more agro-pastoralist community, and the other is just at the edge of the desert in a place called Segel. And these are communities our teams have been in and out of so many times. And as Zipporah was saying, like we know what data we are collecting, go collect the data, come back, see what we found. But the tools bring out a really powerful relational aspect, which is what the society is. And it helps just draw out conversations, in the real stories, learning new dimensions of how things have happened in the past and how they've affected different people. And I think for our staff and for me as well, it was a bit more personal than just collecting data. I was able to just learn so much from the wisdom of elders in communities and women in communities about how droughts have been, about what they think about different contextual issues that are affecting them. So there's just a lot of knowledge that can be drawn out by applying the tools. And I also felt that our staff came out enriched and looking at things from a different from a different lens. You know, it's not just the same thing. And the tools also helped us clarify some things that we've known, but maybe didn't understand better. For example, the use of traditional early warning systems, and how can we blend those with the modern ones, and how conflict, for example, was affecting Marsabit and continues to affect communities in Marsabit even now. So yeah, so that's I would say it was a really powerful and enriching experience.
That's excellent. Thank you. I heard you twice say enriching, or that the team was enriched. I think that's that just caught my attention. That's really exciting. I think that I also heard Zipporah say that it provoked some curiosity in the team, and you both mentioned that they learned things that they didn't know before, even though they've been working in these communities for so long, and that it deepened the connection with the community members and that relational aspect, which is extremely important. So thank you for sharing that. That was very interesting, and I think extremely pertinent to the reason why we chose to use these tools versus some different ones that we might have used. And with that, now I know what you've all been waiting for is the findings, and Mary is going to share with us what we actually did learn from this process.
Okay, with some caveats, we only had, you know, a couple of days, the situation with COVID and whatnot. We didn't have a long time to do the work in the field, but it was partly to test out the tools that do these work, and partly to see what we could learn. And just want to circle back to what you were saying, Alex and Zipporah. We also noted changes in the staff perceptions and attitudes, you know, after they got a chance to experience the tools. We would do these. So Zipporah, the local facilitator, would lead them in the morning, and then in the afternoon, we'd do a Zoom session for a couple of hours with the staff every day. So we got to hear how they were thinking and feeling about the tools, and really saw some interesting shifts in their level of curiosity and respect for the community members, and, you know, what they were learning from them. So I think it opened some minds and enriched them, as you said, Alex. So we found many promising coping behaviors. I'm not going to list all of them, but we were kind of, I don't know, very impressed by the ingenuity of people. But there were a wide range. Some of them were actually promising, like positive coping behaviors, such as alternate income generating activities or feeding wild tubers or other available, you know, foods to the animals. There were also some negative ones, such as charcoal making and selling of a drug called khat. The self-help groups really began to stand out as critical in helping people cope in drought seasons, critical sources of low interest credit during the drought season, and you know, really making a difference. People did state that they had low levels of drought preparedness in general, but they were interested in doing more to prepare for drought in the future, and hoped to do some of that through the self-help or savings groups. We were also fascinated to learn a lot about the traditional sources of early warning information. Traditional sources, as well as word of mouth, seem to be a lot more trusted. Again, the element of trust comes up, more trusted than official early warning information sources. Yeah, though that doesn't actually say anything about, like, I think Paul had asked a question earlier about it. Could you generalize that? It's like, no, I don't think you can. I think some places official information is trusted and other places not, or it depends maybe on the topic, you know. So the women's role also stood out to us. The women already play a large role in the coping mechanisms, just struggling to keep their animals alive, for example, and also to forage for food for their children, and many of the things that they were doing. Their contributions seemed that they would have potential for even greater impact, greater contribution. They wanted to do more through income generating activities. And they also wanted more decision-making power, such as an opportunity to trade small animals in times of need, perhaps in the absence of their spouses. They wanted to be empowered to make those sorts of decisions when their spouse was traveling with a larger herd. Conflict and cooperation was also a large theme of great importance to pastoralists. There have been prolonged ethnic conflicts continuously affecting the sharing of resources among different pastoral communities. And again, trust, they stated that they had very little trust in their own local leaders and county government leadership, and that these individual institutions are far away during our hard times and present when they need our votes. But there was an indication that they trusted local NGOs more. Maybe they were trying to make us feel good, but maybe that's the case. In any case, anyway, I'll go on and share. The team kind of developed a few recommendations from the many findings. One was that we should focus on supporting community preferred early action behaviors. Obviously, that's an easy one because you don't have to market it if the community already prefers it. So considering ways to support pastoralists' existing drought coping mechanisms to further enhance their collective action and social capital and to remove barriers to community preferred early action behaviors. Then increasing support for women's preparation and response to drought. We saw that women and children were the most affected by drought from the stories they were sharing with us. So we're looking for ways to increase support for women in their efforts to prepare for and respond to drought. Explore ways to increase their opportunities to contribute to household and community decision-making by raising the perceived value of their ideas and their contributions among men. Number 3, support traditional peacemaking and conflict resolution approaches. There are traditional rangeland management approaches and peacemaking conflict resolution approaches that, the NGOs and government entities working there should support and encourage. And then finally, number 4, explore ways to increase trust in early warning systems that facilitate improved preparation for drought. Possibly looking for ways to find creative ways to highlight congruences between the traditional approaches and technological, like when those agree, when a traditional early warning and a technological one agrees. That's a good one to point out and to help communities begin to assess the accuracy of those congruences over time, and to look for positive opportunities to build trust in technological systems. So then we wanted to try a very small pilot, field forecast-based action pilot. And the team in Kenya, Alex will tell you about it just in a moment. They wound up using basically elements from recommendation 1, 2, and 4. I think the conflict resolution one is sort of a different activity. So they were able to engage with women and, work on community preferred action and facilitate improved preparation for drought. So Alex, go ahead and tell us a little bit about what's going on with that small pilot.
Okay, thanks, Mary. So we decided based on the recommendations to do a small pilot and learn from it. So we prioritize support to self-help groups to preserve and enhance social capital and collective action. So some of the steps we took first were to identify groups within the target area, which was Segel, if you can see the photo there. And part of the screening things we did was to look at the composition of groups, which is mostly women, and that's important. We wanted to see women more involved. And are they meeting regularly? Are they saving regularly? And also, do they have interest in the idea and contributions to bring as they could? So we did that and identified the groups and then collected baseline data, looking at markers such as the livestock owned, selling patterns, fodder availability, and so on. And we did this for both Segal and another community so that we can see whether there's an impact of actually providing the whole aspect of preparedness, providing hay before the drought is really bad. And we worked with the Ministry of Agriculture, Livestock and Fisheries to identify what hay would be good, and also went through a process of identifying a hay supplier. And we co-shared transportation costs with the group. They were able to contribute a little to the whole project. So sales are currently ongoing. There were challenges of conflict along the Marsabit-Segal Road, so that delayed things a little bit, but sales are ongoing and we are collecting data, and hopefully sometime soon we'll be able to share with you what we learned. But the timing of the intervention is good because of the drought situation in Marsabit. Over to you, Mary.
Thanks. I was slow unmuting. Thank you so much, Alex. Yeah, we'll be excited to hear more as that unfolds. So just one more experience in AHA slides. So from this presentation, wondering if you're thinking, something's turning in your mind about what context you might want to use this sort of tool in, at least hypothetically, or maybe for real. But what context could benefit from a more behavioral approach and from identifying specific early action behaviors? Think about that for a moment, and then you'll have a chance to type that in on AHA slides. And after we share that, I'll hand it back to Tom to do some of the closing activities. Improving wash practices, standards. Thanks. I'd love to know where you were thinking of improving wash practices and standards. Thank you. Gender-based violence, informing response to concurrent shocks. Oh, wow, yeah, thanks. Drought plus COVID plus conflict, exactly. That's a nice complex situation. Harmful cultural practices, health practices, education for girls. Local or national government policies or plans in relation to disaster response. Social protection and care services, integration of national resource management. Yeah, I would love to see, to try out these tools, maybe in Bangladesh with the flooding, or in Philippines with so many typhoons and disasters. Okay, we've got health. What early actions could be carried out to better mitigate impacts of storm when an early warning message is given? Exactly. The burning question for us, child protection. Thank you. Maya, can you tell if people are still writing? Complex situations where different gender, social, age groups may need to have specific responses.
Yeah, I can't tell if people are still putting in their answers, but we have 11 out of 40. So there might be a couple more.
Thank you, Maya. Thank you, everyone. I do hope that you'll keep an eye out for that toolkit when it comes out. And we'll also have a look at the literature review. And yeah, would love to hear if anyone else pilots these tools somewhere else. We'd love to hear about your experience too. So Tom, if you're ready, I'm going to hand it over to you to close us out. Thank you so much, everyone. It's been great to have your active participation.
Yeah, thank you, Mary. I am ready. I want to thank you all. This has been great. I know I've certainly learned a lot. I'm sure I'm not alone, but I want to thank you and the rest of Food for the Hungry presenters today. It's been a really, really interesting, helpful conversation that you guys have led, and I really appreciate all the examples that you've offered from your own application of this tool. It really does help ground it and make it accessible for the rest of us. So thank you for that. On behalf of REAL, I want to thank all of you who joined today, especially all of you who participated in using these AHA slides. I think it did make very interactive and helpful conversation among our group. So thanks for that. We do always want to improve our events that we facilitate through REAL. So please do take a very brief moment to give us some feedback on how today went. It should only take a couple of minutes for you to provide that feedback to our survey. I think you'll see the link there in the chat. As Mary said, the PLA toolkit will be available very shortly in both English and French. And we'll be sending out a message to everyone who registered for today's event with links to the products that were shared and discussed today. Likewise, there will be a recording in both French and English of the webinar for those that you might want to share it with who weren't able to join us today. We also ask, please do sign up for the REAL newsletter to learn about future events, tools, and resources that we're going to be developing through REAL and the follow-on award, REAL 2. We've got lots of work to do and certainly invite you to join us in that. Before we sign off, we'd like to also ask everyone who's still with us, please turn on your cameras real quick. It's always kind of fun just to take a snapshot of our whole big group. And with that, I'll say thank you very much and have a great day. Please turn on your cameras real quick.
Thank you so much for coming.
Thanks all.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. It's so good to see so many familiar faces and some new faces too. Great to see you all. Hi, Reg.
Hi, Mary.
It's been a long time.
Yeah, I miss you.
You'll get a chance to pilot the PLA tool in the Philippines.
Yeah, I'm excited to see the document next week.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.